now to talk with Allister about this topic a little bit more. Allister, welcome.
Hello.
How are you?
From a hotel room in Singapore, 20 past 10 at night here. So
appreciate you joining at this time of the day. Obviously, when I invited you, I thought you would be. So fantastic. Yeah, excited to talk to you quickly about our report. And I think let's jump right into it. I already gave the people a little bit of insight who is Allister actually. So maybe you can tell us a little bit just about Sylvera, and then maybe also a little bit this report and what are your, I would say, main insights, and we can dig a little bit deeper after that.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much, Adrian. It's been great to collaborate on this one. Hopefully my hotel room internet is going to hold up for the duration of this podcast. Just a word on Sylvera. So we're a data business. We provide data insights on the three themes, most known for carbon markets, spatial data, and more recently information on carbon intensity for industrial production. And we're most for assessing the carbon credits. That's where we started. And this is kind of, you touched on your introduction there, Adrian. I think similar conclusions with you know, 2 or 3 tales that pop out. I think the one to centralize is the positive one. Always the initial take from media tends to focus on the negative angle. I think the positive angle here is there are companies in the DAX 40 who've basically solved this. Like they are compensating for their emissions with credits that relate to high quality activities, and they're telling the world what they're doing. This is actually not that complicated. So they're doing the right thing, they're disclosing it, and they're using the tools available to them and doing a great job. So I think hopefully we can come back next year and say, 5 times that number are in that category. So I think, that's the positive story, right? It can easily be done. Everything is there, and maybe that kind of segues to the second one, which is like there are people that are doing taking sensible actions, and then just not telling the world about it. so that's a strange thing, and we would hope that would be a temporary state of the world, and that's almost because they want to do the right thing, but they're almost they fear the criticism that might attract. So I think once it's clear that it's easy for these actors to avoid the lower quality credits, then they should be comfortable in sharing what they've done, right? Why spend the money otherwise? And hide what you're doing, right? It makes no sense. So that's the next thing. And then the other 2 points are maybe, the ones that tend to get focused on, but I think it's important to say that they're solvable, like easily solvable now. People who are taking activity but buying credits that do not have the integrity that, frankly, the market is kind of centralizing much more on that high integrity end of the spectrum, and they haven't quite caught up. So you would hope that they would figure that out and kind of move along with the times. And then, like you say, the sad thing is like I think there's a kind of understanding now of the use of carbon credits as completely as like they represent a compensation for the emissions and then the climate impacts of those emissions, rather than a way of avoiding their emissions reductions internally in the supply chain, which actually has to be the priority for everyone. But yeah, half of these businesses haven't taken no action to compensate. So that, for some reason, doesn't attract the scandal of the people that are trying their best. But yeah, they're the kind of central stories of this report, right? So hopefully, as time passes, those will evolve. But that's where we are today, right? I think it's fair to say we've reflected the state of play right back on these 40 companies.
And do you think, if we look forward to a year, can that much change in a year? Is it easy for a company to actually look back and say like, hey, this is what we've done a year ago, but we understand it now. We've gone on that journey, and now we are able to do it in a way, I would say, aligned way with current standards like Oxford principles or ICVM or ratings?
It's definitely possible. I think one thing, I'm sure you encounter this as well. Some actors, the reality is everybody in this market and on the net zero journey in general are doing things that haven't been done before. And therefore, there's always going to be learning and improvement because that's what happens when you do new things. So what you tend to see is there can be almost a fear factor to acknowledging that things in the past haven't been perfect. But actually, the whole market hasn't been perfect. Nobody is net zero. Nobody, probably very few people, even at an individual level, are on the right track to net zero. An extremely small number of are on the trajectory to net zero. So it's fine to improve. But I do think I'd be actually curious to see if you hear this. Almost to do things differently requires you to admit that the things that have been done in the past haven't been perfect. But I think the thing that's changed is there's people like you that could help with the procurement. There's all these information sources. There's the academic guidance like you have for the so there are tools that the environment has changed, the resources have changed. So it's okay to change the strategy, but there is a little bit of like, if we do things differently, maybe we have to spend more money, maybe we have to buy less credits, maybe we have to acknowledge that the things in the past weren't perfect, and that can create almost like a drag on change.
Yeah, what I'm also seeing is a little bit of the almost a management problem, right? Someone was responsible to create the strategy for. Obviously, no one went to that market and said, we do whatever. I have no strategy. I think strategy is obviously also not done every year for the market, not for every company. So let's say a company has done the last strategy that's together 4 years, and someone came up with that strategy, but this person didn't have the tools. Now this person to come up and say like, look, it's not that I've done something wrong, but the market was not working really well. We have changed that strategy.
Exactly.
So that's what I'm seeing a lot. And I think there is some of inertia that we have to overcome, right? We have to say like, look, I did to my best knowledge 4 years ago what I've thought would have been the best strategy for us, but we have to readjust, and there's different things. And I think some people either are scared that then it would just cost way more, and then they have to hit like way high budget, because really often this sits in some kind of cost center, right? So that's what I'm seeing, that they say like they're scared when they not come up with a new strategy, then maybe or if they come up with a new strategy, then maybe it's cut completely because the budget is too high. And I also think this only can then work if we have those incentives, right? You were talking about like, are we doing this even? Am I not allowed to do a marketing claim? Why am I doing this actually? So it's going a lot back to incentives and making the right case internally why we should do this now and why you should get the budget now. And I think I agree on that every company can do that.
And I think what this shows, and I think again the positive aspect of it is, hopefully the sustainability teams can say, hey, budget holder, exec team, do we want to be like these handful of leaders, or do we want to let the rest of that chart overtake us, and or be just disappear off the chart? And usually when you speak to leadership level, they, their stakeholders, especially the asset owners, are still asking those questions, right? The long-term capital still cares. So typically at board and leadership level, they're going to say, well, look, are we going to, are our margins as a DAX 40 business going to change if we make some compensation? And like the margins aren't really going to change. So then it makes it kind of easy, right? Yeah, we should compensate. If the cost's going to go up, you can apply some strategy that brings in higher proportion of removals, which is what the Oxford principle says. Anyway, you can bring in the higher price strategies over time as your decarbonisation plan. You can manage it, you can make those trade-offs and decisions, but typically the management team at the senior level tends to be pro. And like you say, I think there's a bit of a fear. Hey, if we share the best practice and the fact that it might cost more, the budget will go to zero. But we don't see that very often, actually, quite infrequently. Very rarely it does. I think it's probably worth mentioning that it has. But actually, even in those cases, we've seen those actors disappear for a couple of years and then come back again, because it just doesn't feel right to do nothing. Once you started doing nothing, it's like, what? We're just going to do nothing? Like, it seems like kind of wrong, right? So they come back a couple of years later, but with a more sophisticated strategy.
Yeah, so I think you can implement that quite nicely in transition planning, especially the Oxford principles. What we've seen is that you actually don't have to spend that much more than old strategies that were reliant on a lot of renewable energy and cook stoves only. But I think if you start with Oxford, you probably don't even have to spend that much more, and then just have a ramp up phase towards your net zero. And I think we will see a lot of that. I may just switch gears a little bit. In the report, we had like 57% of the DAX 40 projects were scored below BBB on Sylvera. Is this representative of the live market, or are the DAX 40 buyers below or above the current curve? How do you see the German market on this extent?
This isn't markedly worse or better, I think, than the general mix. I think actually, if you'd done this a couple of years ago, the general mix would have been worse than this. So like, it's not a share of dollars, it's a share of credits. So tends to be, especially now, those lower rated credits. And why BBB? BBB is like halfway. If you're BBB or above, you're in the top half of the rating scale, and if you're BB or below, then you're in the bottom half. So there's a kind of an implicit threshold there. Yeah, a couple of years ago, this would have been near 80% on a global basis. So this is okay. 57 doesn't sound great, but it's definitely an improvement on where the global mix was. And I don't think it's markedly different. If you were to look at,
is this a trend? Is a trend that in general the market goes more and more towards quality?
100%, and it's there's kind of a chicken and egg thing, which is and actually the history of Sylvera, and most people don't know, we tried to be a developer and failed.
Oh, is it? I didn't even know that.
Yeah, exactly. We tried to be a developer, and we wanted to do extremely high quality land restoration projects, native species, and we found ways of doing those for what at the time 2019 was extremely economically efficient. We had that lens. We were coming from a economic optimization, because I come from the renewables industry. It's
Yeah.
extremely cost focused. It's like, we won't compromise on quality, we'll find the lowest cost. And even then, we couldn't get corporate off-takers to commit to buying the credits, and we needed that to finance the project activity at the price we needed, which at the time was around $15 for high quality nature-based removal, which now would be extremely cheap.
I would love that kind of
And
credit in my portfolio, but
you would sell
right
out
topic.
instantaneously.
100%.
And what we've seen now is the willingness to have this quality signal. The buyers are like, oh, now that I know that's what is the fair price, it's these projects are not making huge profit margins. They're breaking even. They may be making enough to get a fair risk-adjusted rate of return if they're lucky. And the corporate might be like, yeah, I'm happy to pay $30 for a mangrove restoration credit, maybe $50, maybe more, maybe for biochar I'll pay again over 100, and that's reasonable. Now I know it represents the cost of that activity. I think in the past they were like, someone will sell me a credit from a eucalyptus monoculture in Brazil for $5, or a Uruguay or something for $5. So why would I pay 15? I don't understand. They're the same, aren't they? And it was impossible. So I think you have willingness to pay, and then people then come to the market and say, oh, that you're willing to pay $30. Well, I can do real genuine activities on the ground for $30, and so then it brings supply in. So what you're seeing is the project, the older ones that had more compromised carbon out as they kind of expire and there's less demand, and then all the new, the majority of the new projects coming to market, much higher quality, serving this need. So you're seeing the shift. It's really, that's like the really great positive story. You're seeing hundreds of millions of dollars, and then you're looking for the investment, not just the spend on today's activity, billions of dollars, all going to things that are actually real, which is like what the market's supposed to do. And then that brings the confidence in, and then you're in the 30, 35 odd, all but the handful in your report. And then if there's good supply, the price is reasonable. It's like, it's more expensive, maybe it's fair for the outcome, the climate outcome, and your peers are increasingly participating, and you're not on that list, and your board members like, oh, why weren't we on that list? We're not there, and then you start to get this change. So we should do this again, and like a year or two, and we test the theory.
No, definitely.
Like,
this will be a yearly report,
definitely.
because I think one report is interesting, but I think if you have two, then you see what is actually happening in the world, right?
Definitely.
Because it's all about trends. If we see this is getting worse, then that wouldn't be good, right? So obviously, I hope we get better, but we should definitely do this, because just imagine, like, in 5 years we will look back and hopefully say, like, can you still remember 2026? That report was actually ridiculous. Think about it now, because we're on a completely different level. So I hope it will be like that. Also, you also have this these price indices on the webpage, right? You now also can correlate quality and ratings to prices, right? So for instance, more than BBB has a higher price than below BBB.
Yes, exactly. So there's we get prices shared to us, and we aggregate them and anonymize them. So we have over the years we've aggregated 200,000 prices. So we can have a pretty good view of what the price should be at any given time. And over really, we saw positive signs a couple of years ago, but from a statistical perspective, because we're kind of scientists under the hood, it's really in the last 18 months you've seen extremely strong statistically powerful signal that the ratings drive price premia, that's just reflecting the buyer preferences. So and there's this famous Nobel-winning economics paper called Market for Lemons by a guy called George Akerlof, and he basically says markets that have no information don't work well, and it gets all sorts of poor behavior. And his example is around used cars. The seller of the car knows if it's good or bad, but the buyer doesn't know. So the buyer tends to assume that the car is bad, and the actor with the good car gets penalized, and the actor with the bad car gets rewarded. And this is why you have inspections and warranties, and why people pay the premium for the dealer approved, the brand approved used car, right? Because they've provided some level of assurance is worth maybe thousands of euros, thousands of dollars. That's what we've seen. And honestly, at the beginning of the business, we were like, if within a few years the rating doesn't drive price, we'll just close the business, because it means that people don't have any utility from the data, and they don't believe the data. They don't think that it reflects reality. And then the good thing is, 2 or 3 years ago, we started to see the changing, but it wasn't powerful statistically. And as we got more data, we were like, oh wow. So now, for nature-based removals is a good example. There's a 330% premium between an A grade and a D grade. So
wow.
so it's huge. And even when you have credits in a compliance market, like in the US for forestry management, there's still a 50% premium between the top and the bottom ratings. So even when you're submitting the credit and getting a tax discount, you still pay a small premium, even though you don't required. There's not required to. And 50% is actually not small; it's significant. So it's not that our ratings drive price; it's that our ratings have given the buyers information, and it turns out that they care about the quality of the credits, and they're willing to pay more. So it's not the rating that's changed the thing; it's the ratings that have allowed the buyers to
100%. I also think we've seen that a lot of education had to go onto that, like educate the buyers on ratings, and I think we made huge progress over the last 1 to 2 years. Thanks so much for all the work you're doing with Sylvera, and then obviously also thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Pleasure.
Yeah, and enjoy your sleep in Singapore, and otherwise enjoy Singapore in general.
And hopefully we'll have a great follow-up show next year.
Okay. All right. See you, Allister. Have a good one.
Take care. Bye.